In this video we're going to have a look at groups of modes that we call the relative modes. And what do we mean by relative? Well, we think of our relatives, those are our family and people who are very close to us, and so that's a similar idea with these modes. We're looking at modes that can be built from the same group of notes, and we looked at this a little bit in the last video when we said that if we know a major scale, we can actually build a load of modes from knowing the pool of notes that make up that major scale. So if you remember this major scale, that's the scale from C to C, and it's the C Ionian mode, but normally we call it the C major scale. And from that pool of notes, in this case all the white keys, we can build a load of different modes. So we've got our C major, that's one scale or mode that we can build, and we can also build from the same pool of notes, so not adding any different notes into the mix, we can build a D Dorian. Because that's using exactly the same pool of notes. So we would say that C major and D Dorian have some kind of relationship. They're relative modes. Another one that I put into this group would be E Phrygian, because of course E Phrygian also uses that same pool of notes. F Lydian, G Mixolydian, A Aeolian, and B Locrian. And so this group of modes, I'm going to group together and say this is one set of relative modes. These modes are all relative because they draw from the same basic pool of notes. And a good way of thinking of that pool is that it's the pool of notes created by the C major scale. And so that's this idea of relative modes. Okay, so this time I'm going to try and build a different set of relative modes. And I'm going to use as my pool of notes the notes of the E flat major scale. So that's E flat major. If you didn't know that the E flat major scale has all of the white notes except for an E flat, an A flat, and a B flat. It looks like this. Okay, so we want to build a set of relative modes. We're going to do a very similar thing to what we just did with the C major scale. We'll build out a mode based on each of the different steps of the scale, and you'll notice that they have the same pattern, that the mode built on the second step is going to be a Dorian, just the same way that with our C major scale, the second step of that scale was a D. Here we're using our E flat major scale, and so the second step of the scale will give us an F Dorian. So if we look at this, starting on this note, here's an F, and we play up using that E flat, A flat, and B flat. It gives us a scale of F Dorian. So that's another reason why those two scales have a relationship, and we can build out the rest of our set of relative modes. E flat, F, G, A flat. Because don't forget this scale has an A flat and a B flat, C and D. And so the G is going to give us a Phrygian sound. Phrygian. A flat is going to be Lydian. B flat is going to be Mixolydian. C is going to be Aeolian. And D is going to be Locrian. And that does follow the same pattern. So if we write the numbers down here next to the steps of the scale, so these are the scale degrees essentially of E flat major, what we'll notice is that we get the same pattern of scales coming out. So if you take any major scale, you'll be able to build this set of relative modes starting on the different degrees of the scale. So if you take a major scale and start on the second degree and play the notes of that major scale, you'll get a Dorian mode. If you start on the fifth degree of the scale and you play the notes of that major scale, you will get a Mixolydian mode. Why is that important? Well, because of this idea of relative modes. It's saying that actually there is this sort of relationship between this particular set of modes. So there's a relationship between A flat Lydian and E flat major because they draw their notes from the same pool of pitches. And so understanding all these relationships between the various different modes will come in very, very handy when we get in the future to talk about composing melodies and improvising over a chord scheme. And so it's really useful to make sure you're quite comfortable being able to work out this set of relative modes for any major scale.